Welcome to Paradigms at paradigms.life, the radio show and podcast that brings you inspiring people with visions of a viable future for life on Earth that includes humans. Hi, I'm Baruch, host of Paradigms. Thanks for listening. I think you're going to enjoy this episode. We're focusing on Vermont. There was some disastrous flooding in Vermont earlier this month. People are coming together to help neighbors and deal with the disaster. We'll be talking with a couple of Vermont musicians, a father-daughter duo who have a new record out, and we'll be talking with a couple of folks from Green Mountain United Way about how the communities are faring. So great music and some really wonderful, affirming stuff going on in small towns, because Vermont is all small towns. First, let's meet my musical guests on this episode of Paradigms. Bob Amos, welcome to Paradigms.
Oh, it's delightful to be here, Baruch. Nice to see you.
And I know that Sarah, your daughter and musical partner, will be here soon, and looking forward to that. Welcome to the show. You guys are Vermonters, and you have been a musician for a long time and been playing bluegrass for a long time. Just want to ask you, firstly, just a bit about your musical background and kind of how you got to playing and how Sarah ended up becoming your singing partner.
You're right. I've been doing this a long time, and I grew up in a family that there were no musicians in the family, but they were great listeners and music fans. So I have older siblings who were teenagers in the 60s, and I was a little kid, would bring all kinds of music into the house, everything, a lot of folk music, and of course, rock and roll and soul music and everything in between. And then my parents were just great music fans. I don't think I ever heard them really sing or anything, but they had wonderful music collection. I mean, my mom loved, she loved Sinatra. She loved show music. My dad was into all kinds of eclectic folk music, what we would now call world music, but more indigenous world music, not modern. And so he would have, like koto players from Japan or African drummers, or he was a big fan of Leon Bibb, the folk singer I think he was from Canada, right? And, Joan Baez and everything. I think Dylan was a little edgy for my dad, but we all had my sister had those records. So I was exposed to everything. And then I started off, wanting to play guitar. I think I first started messing around with guitar when I was about 11. And then I kind of moved from rock music. I was exposed. My oldest brother was away, and he came back with a bluegrass record, and that kind of lit that fire. And I wanted a banjo. And so I got a banjo. And so all through my life, I've kind of now toggled back and forth between being a singer-songwriter, kind of more folk influenced, and also being a bluegrass guy and writing bluegrass music and performing bluegrass music. So what Sarah and I are doing now is a little bit more dressed down. We do a full bluegrass band, full-blown thing too, but we also do this duet thing, which is more, I guess we'd call it Americana. I don't even know what to call it these days, but like 80% stuff that I write, 20% covers of old traditional songs like you've heard on the album. That's my background. And then Sarah, being a little kid, when I toured for many years with a band called Front Range, which was a big bluegrass band. We recorded for Sugar Hill Records and toured throughout the United States and Europe, one trip to South America. Sarah was little during that time, but she grew up, coming to the concerts and hearing music. And she just happened to be, just born and blessed with a great voice. Even as a little kid, she sang in choirs. And then Front Range stopped. And then we moved back up here to kind of our old home place where a lot of my family lives up in northern Vermont. I was kind of retooling, just decide what's next. And I have a studio up here. So I was, producing other people and doing that. But I missed playing. And so Sarah and her brother both started playing with me as kind of Sarah started singing with me when she was about 12, maybe 13. And then Nate moved off, and he's a successful musician and based out of Brooklyn now, kind of in the art pop world. But Sarah's settled down and got a job here, and we've been playing together all this time. And I just love singing with her. And, as a dad, it's really rare to have your kids, first of all, when they're grown, have any time or want to hang out with their parents that much. You know? So I'm just really lucky that way. And she just loves to sing with me. And I love singing with her. So it's really been a cool evolution of our relationship as father and offspring to just being peers and working together. And Sarah does a lot in terms of picking what material we do. She'll go through my catalog and dust off some older songs and say, "Hey, this one would be good for us. What do you think?" And I'll say, "Sure, let's do it." And so I've rearranged some songs for her to sing, or just brought her into harmony on songs that I used to sing by myself. And it's just been rejuvenating. And I have to say, creatively, it's the most fun thing and enjoyable thing I've ever done in my long musical career. I just love singing with Sarah. It's just a very natural thing. I'm sure that the genetic component has something to do with that, and the fact that she grew up listening to me. So our phrasing just is very natural. We don't even have to work on that. We just figure out what we're going to sing, and then it's pretty much done.
Vermont just had all this absolutely disastrous flooding, and
Yes.
I'm guessing that Sarah has been out and about, and it just takes a lot longer to get where you're going because so many roads have been washed out.
Our particular little area of Vermont, we're way up in the northeast corner, what they call the Northeast Kingdom, in Caledonia County, which is a pretty cool sounding county to be from. We kind of escaped the worst of it. We did have flooding here. We had really torrential rains, but just west of us in central Vermont, they got slammed. I have friends and acquaintances who, really got hit hard. A guy that plays in our band lives down in central Vermont, and his neighbor's house just got picked up and taken away. He's okay. He has some water in his basement, but to have it hit you that hard and that close, it's a scary thing. It's really odd because we don't really get that kind of weather here very often. So I hope it's not a harbinger of what's coming, but one never knows. I mean, right? Things are changing climatically. But anyway, yeah, the state's kind of a mess, but the cleanup is happening really fast. Most of the roads are at least passable now. There are a few back roads that are still washed out, and they're getting them passable pretty fast. But everything's a little slower.
I mean, usually when people think of severe weather in Vermont, they think of the winter, and winters are severe. And, I can remember years where I had 12 feet of snow in my yard in Bolton.
Yeah, right. Exactly right. So, and we're used to that, so we know how to hunker down. You either have a wood stove or a generator or something, and you just kind of come to the realization that it's possible at some point in the winter, and most winters you'll have a power outage and you have to just hunker down. So, you always have extra food in the house, and the plowing rigs and stuff here in the North Country are great because they just expect it.
Yeah.
So they actually usually get the roads cleared, and we're far enough north that we don't get ice. You remember, we don't get a whole lot of ice. I mean, because ice shuts everything down.
No, in the Northeast Kingdom, you get a lot of snow, though. Really a lot.
And we love it because the snowpack melts really slowly, and it feeds the water table. And so we've had a couple weird years where we had a low snowpack, and this past winter was one, but we've kind of made up for it with all the rain.
Yeah. Although a lot gets lost to runoff.
Yeah. And everything's so saturated. I mean, there's no place for it to go. So, the topography in Vermont, as you know, is very rolly, and down in the floodplains are not really big because you've got hills. And so the floodplains historically do their job, right? They absorb the rain, and the water flows up, and that's just the way nature works. Farmers used to use they still do use those floodplains, and they expect it, but that actually is good for the soil.
But the river valleys in Vermont are more narrow than they are like out west.
Exactly. So it doesn't take much to overflow them. So most years it's fine. Sometimes you'll get a high rainfall and it'll flood, but this one was just dumped so much water so fast. And it was a weird storm. I mean, every once in a while, a hurricane will track north, right? Like Irene came up about
10 years ago.
Yeah, and it did a lot of mess. It did a lot of damage up here. But, you see a hurricane coming, you can this storm was just basically a system of really bad thunderstorms. And it hit so fast and it dumped so much rain. I don't know, in central Vermont, I think they got over 8 or 9 inches in just a matter of hours. There's just nowhere for it to go, right? So
The great thing about Vermont is Vermonters, and Vermonters are resilient. And as we've been talking about winters, they're used to that. And so Vermonters really come out and help each other. And right now, that's what's happening.
they do. I think Calvin Coolidge was a president who came from Vermont. I think he coined the phrase "our brave little state." And there's another motto up here now called Vermont Strong, which is about neighbors helping each other and that you, Sarah? Yes, it is. All right.
All right. Yay.
So yeah, people have really been pitching in, and there are fundraising efforts going on, and government support is there. So there's been stuff. Brooke, this is Sarah. Sarah,
Hi,
this is Brooke.
Sarah.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Sarah Amos joining her dad now. Welcome to Paradigm.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Your dad and I have just been talking about his musical background and a little bit how Vermont is faring from the storm and all the flooding and everything. And just saw a post by John Galemore all about different small towns in Vermont. He retooled his Hurricane Irene song
Oh, okay.
for this storm and just hearing the names of familiar places. But so glad you made it and that you are able to get around and that you all did not lose your home.
Yes, yeah, we're very, very lucky where we are.
On our place, and Sarah just lives across the road in my parents' old house, the original farmhouse on the property. We're up in the hills, so it would take, let's just say, if our place flooded, the whole world would be in trouble.
Right. That means the oceans have risen really fast.
Right. So, where we are, but we still have brooks up here, and they can overflow, and you can get little brooks causing a lot of trouble.
Oh, yes.
But ours seems to have channeled down. It was fine. I kept an eye on it, and we have one coming right by, kind of across the road between our two houses. But the culvert was clear, and it kept flowing.
Wow. And I bet all the beaver dams got washed out all over the state, probably.
Probably, but just like Vermonters, they're pretty industrious. So
they're rebuilding.
I'm sure they will rebuild. So,
Sarah, before we get into a little music, I would love to hear about your singing and how you. I mean, I just heard from Bob about his perspective of how you came along as a musician, but what inspired and inspires you, and what's it like singing with your dad?
Singing with my dad, I just think of as being one of the coolest parts about my life. So few people get to have that kind of experience creating music and singing with their family. For me, from my perspective, so I grew up obviously listening to my dad perform, watching him perform at festivals, starting from when I was really little. I learned at a very young age how to fall asleep at a bluegrass concert with banjos blasting nearby, which I like to think gave me a little bit of an advantage once we started having to camp at festivals when you've got jams going until 3 a.m. right outside your tent, like 5 feet from your head. I was able to sleep a little better at those given my early life training. But, when you're a kid, I knew that my dad was a touring musician, and a famous bluegrass musician. In my mind, when you're a kid, you don't really understand like the difference between someone like, your dad who's a musician and like, say, the Beatles. And so in my head, on par with one another in terms of how big a deal they were to me in my life. I grew up very much on the Beatles and my dad's music. He had me in music programs as a kid. I did a lot of choir. I was in a lot of children's choirs where I learned, very kind of classical techniques. I also took piano lessons. That's my main instrument still, other than my voice. Once I was probably about 11 or 12 was just the first time that we kind of sang together in front of people.
Well, I actually took you along on a few gigs when you were really little. Remember that? When we went we did some Christmas time concerts when we lived in Winchester, Virginia.
Well, yeah, that's the first one I remember is that Christmas thing.
Yeah, and you were about
I think I was 8? I think it was
7?
9 or 10.
Yeah, okay.
I was a little bit older than that. Just young enough to still have no idea what to do.
But she was still a total pro. I mean, I just remember taking Sarah to this gig. It was like at a concert at a community center. And I thought, you want to come? Yeah, she says, sure. And then I said, you want to sing something? She goes, yeah, okay.
But just to kind of get back to what it's been like for me, from my perspective, getting to sing with my dad is, and I've said this before. So my dad, I love listening to him nerd out about musicians that he really likes. like the Beatles lore, all this stuff. To me, like he is my Beatles kind of. So I'll drag him back into his catalog, like albums that are forever old, like his live album specifically. I'll like quote the stage banter that he and his band used to do. I mean, to me, it's just as special. And so getting to perform with him has been everything to me. And there's just something so special about singing harmonies with the person who made you. I mean, it's just, I can't really compare it to anything else. And it can be kind of hard to describe because so few people get to experience that. But I just don't know what life is like without it. It's like breathing to me.
The record that you just released, Ever Onward, I had just listened to it, really enjoyed it so much. Most of the tunes are originals, which is really great. And then there are a couple of, traditional songs that are also really wonderful that, of course, listeners will recognize. Would you play something?
Sure. The funny thing about Sarah and I, we're being interviewed, so maybe we should say that. We hardly ever practice unless we're learning a new song, because we like being really at the moment, and we know each other's voices and things so well, is that we love just kind of coming on stage and just going for it. We do practice when we don't know things, too well, but a lot of songs we've been doing for a while, we just we learn them and then we just do them when we're on stage. And other than warm-ups or learning something new, and it makes it a little bit of an adventure, but like fun. So this is a little bit actually early, Baruch, for us to sing, but we'll try. We'll give it a shot. I know I have coffee, but it's not that early. But
I'll take another sip of mine.
From a singing perspective. Sure. Okay, so we'll do the leadoff song from the album, which is a song I wrote about right where we live. It's kind of a Vermont song called "The Hills That I Call Home." I was born upon a hillside where the pines sing in the wind, where my father lived before me and his father before him. We believe in simple living. It's life we choose to know. All we need here is our freedom and a place to call our own. In the land of Ethan Allen, where the sugar maples grow, where the wild grass fills the meadows and the rocky rivers flow, lie the hills that I call home. I have traveled across the country. There is much that I have learned. Still I felt no peace inside me till the day that I return. For there are two things you can count on in this world that we all face. Every season has an ending. Every person has a place. In the land of Ethan Allen, where the sugar maples grow, where the wild grass fills the meadows and the rocky rivers flow, lie the hills that I call home.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Makes me miss Vermont.
It's still here.
It is. It is. It's a beautiful place, and it's a very special place, and it's an unusual place. As states go in the United States, it's an unusual place. It's very rural. At this point, it's mostly forest. The population stays about the same and has for a long time. Winter keeps some people away, and summer brings some people in, and it's very agricultural, and it's facing all of the challenges that all of the states in the U.S. are facing right now with crime and drug problems and all of the social ills that we are encountering.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, we do. We have all of that. But, again, as you said, and it's a very community-minded state. People are really active in their communities. And it helps when it's, the towns are mostly smaller because people just know each other. And so, dealing with those who need help or trying to at least make every place a better place to live is an important part of the Vermont ethic. It's kind of old-fashioned in that way.
Yeah.
Even though it's a very progressive state in that way, it's kind of old-worldy almost. We still have town meetings, as you know, and that's where a lot of stuff gets decided.
It's one of the beautiful things about small communities that I've always loved is, you sort of trade anonymity for accountability, which in my mind is a really important way to have a healthy, thriving community. So, small town life is not for everybody, but I certainly like it. And going back to the song that we just played, the second verse is about, I've traveled across the country, and there's much that I've learned, but I felt no peace inside until the day that I returned. And one of the reasons I love playing that song is, of course, when I was in my, my college years, I went pretty far away. I went all the way to Florida, probably also to escape some of those Vermont winters. And, afterward, I found myself at a bit of a crossroads deciding what to do, whether I wanted to continue living away out of the state, which would mean not being able to play as much music with my dad, or whether I wanted to come home. And I made the choice to come back here and really start regrowing some roots here, renourishing the ones that I had previously established. And it's been, the best 10 years of my life. And I'm so lucky to live as close to my parents as I do. As he said, I live in his parents' old farmhouse just right up the road here. And I love being near family, and I'm lucky to have the family that I do.
And Mom and I are glad you feel that way.
You make it pretty easy.
You're talking about being in a small town, and there's been a song recently about a small town that's been very controversial because it's invoked some horrific racist and violent imagery. And I want to say Vermont, which was a republic before it was a state. A lot of folks don't know that. I'm sure you do because you're Vermonters. Vermont was one of the first anti-slave states. Vermont has struggled with social equality and social justice like everywhere, but has always come out on top of being for social justice, being for equality, being for human decency and people treating each other like we're a community, no matter how alike or different we might be. And I just wanted to kind of highlight, this is what a real small town is about. A real small town is about people caring about each other, no matter who they are.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely. And that actually leads to a song really beautifully, Baruch. So, Beautiful Day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was a song, a little bit of history on this song. So I wrote this song in the 90s when I was touring with my band Front Range, and it got a lot of attention. This kind of an inspirational message. And it actually won the International Bluegrass Music Association's Gospel Recording of the Year in 1995. I think you could interpret it that way, but it's more really a song about crossing bridges and being tolerant and rising together, and accepting our fellow people regardless. And as I used to introduce it, it's a pretty simple song about a difficult situation. And here it is well over 20 years later, and it's still relevant. I think this is just something we always deal with and always hope for. And it's a song of hope Sarah wanted to retool this one and redo it, and so I changed a little bit where we have a modulation in the middle, and she takes the second verse, which was really cool, and it's very meaningful for us, I think, to do this song in particular.
Yeah. So this was kind of I guess my dad's aha song when I volunteered. I knew the tenor part on the song as his previous band Front Range had arranged it. I volunteered to do it, and I guess I did okay. And
well, it was one of those moments when, I said you want to sing Beautiful Day. She goes, "Oh, I know the tenor part. I know the harmony part." And I said, "Okay, that's great." And we sat down and we sang, and I had like shivers going up the back of my neck. And I was thinking to myself, okay, I know what I'm going to be doing now. So I'm going to be singing with her, and here it is. That was a while ago. But anyway, it's been
over 20. Wow, yeah, it's been 20 years.
Almost 20 years. It's been like 18 years. Whew. But I mean, Sarah was away for a lot of that, but she came back. But anyway, this is One Beautiful Day.
When we have fools and all the head
That was really beautiful. I love what you two are doing. The record is really wonderful. I hope lots of people listen to it. Definitely going to get this out there to folks, and appreciate you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story and your beautiful music and your Vermont strong hearts.
Thank you, Baruch. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
I got to spend a little time with Bob and Sarah Amos, and you just heard our conversation and some of their music. We're going to be listening to more of their music throughout the episode. In fact, right now we're going to hear a song from their new album, Ever Onward, and then we'll be back to talk with Tanya Kristen and Sarah Galbraith of Green Mountain United Way. This song is called Wherever I Go. Bob and Sarah Amos. This is Paradigms at paradigms.life.
It's many miles to the Shenandoah, still I keep it in view. The way you're close to me when I'm far from you. Though we know that we can't be together as much as we'd both like, you're always here, so clear within my sight. Whatever I do, near or far, wherever I go, there you sailing out on a sea of faces in a vessel of songs, keeping watch for the place where I belong. Then a beam of sun comes streaming through a broken cloud, and I think I see your face out in the crowd. Whatever I do, near or far, wherever I go, there you are.
Wherever I Go, Bob and Sarah Amos from their new album Ever Onward. Isn't that really lovely? And now here is the first part of my conversation with Tanya Kristen and Sarah Galbraith from Green Mountain United Way. Welcome to Paradigms, Tanya Kristen, Executive Director, and Sarah Galbraith, Director of Development and Community Engagement for Green Mountain United Way. Thank you both so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. As most people know, I'm sure our listeners know, Vermont recently had some massive flooding. unusual for Vermont, which is a landlocked state. You don't usually expect that, although rivers and lakes flood when you get a lot of rain. And as a Vermonter, I know Vermonters are really resilient and resourceful and really great at helping each other out. People can be on the opposite ends of the political spectrum, but they'll pull each other out of the ditch. And so it's a really great thing. I wanted to ask you both, what's happening in Vermont in response to the flooding? What are you seeing in terms of how people are helping and what is still needed?
I'm so glad that you phrased it that way. Our past few weeks, of course, have been dominated by the magnitude of this disaster that has hit, of course, our state capital, Berry City, but also equally as important, our rural communities. And as we navigate how best to respond to this, what we are seeing is that, that authentic kind of tenacity to support each other, regardless of where you stand politically, religiously, or otherwise. That has never been more clear for us. What we have seen firsthand is, as a relatively large nonprofit organization, that the necessity for us to be on the ground, standing side by side with our community, as opposed to behind a screen, trying to connect people, continues to be incredibly important to our work. So I think that this is really reframing how do we connect to our communities in a way that is authentic, but also useful. And Sarah has done a wonderful job really hitting the ground in our very small towns and establishing those connections quickly.
Sarah, tell me about some of that.
Well, I live in one of those small towns. I live in Marshfield. And on Monday night, July 10th, I believe, you could see in real time on social media how quickly roads all over town were washing out. Travelers on Route 2, which is the major interstate route that comes through, were being stranded, just massive washouts and flash flooding happening. And the fear and worry was really palpable. And then the very next morning at Green Mountain United Way, I was at home. I was without power until about 6 a.m, and that came back on. And I pretty quickly after that was on emails and phone calls and right into conversations with other United Ways around the state and the 211 program to figure out, how do we mobilize? What do we do? A lot of great support and resources and energy. And also we quickly started to see some real gaps in our rural communities. And so that seemed like the best place for us to step in and help and just connect local leaders who have tremendous capacity in those small towns to organize. I mean, these are towns that got right to fixing the roads, feeding themselves, cleaning out people's homes. They know how to take care of each other. And so for us, it really seemed like the best role was to connect those local leaders and that local energy with the supplies and support that they needed.
Recently, there's been a lot of use of the phrase small town because of a particular song that came out exalting some of the most horrific values one could have, in my opinion. But what I love is seeing how, in reality, what small towns are about is people helping each other.
I think that's such an excellent comment. My husband actually brought that song to my attention a few days ago, and it just made me chuckle because it does stem from what we have become, normalized to, of strong divisiveness, particularly across political platforms. And that is seen here in Vermont too. And we're kind of rephrasing that not in my small town, well, actually, yes, in my small town, yes, we can overcome. Yes, we come together when needed. And the conversation does not have to be us pitted against one another, but where is that common humanity? And there is nothing like a disaster to really start pulling people together and to start reframing that message of what it means to be in a small town. And even in our, considered urban areas, they're still small. I'm a Montpelier resident, and it is a tiny little place. And Berry City is just a gem of, blue collar, traditional, steeped in heritage. How do we relate to our more urban centered areas and really pull together resources that are put there first and quote small towns second. And our job is to really connect that and say, we are one right now. This is challenging, but we are definitely one.
Vermont strong.
Mm-hmm.
We are. I've been thinking about that song too. I forget how I heard it. yeah, I think there are some things we can definitely point to as problem areas and room for improvement kind of characteristics of small towns, but there's also a lot of good happening in our small towns.
Yeah. I would just like to add, it was reflecting on this, not that we have had tons of minutes to reflect yet. It's been quite a whirlwind these past few weeks, but thinking about where we were 3 years ago of yearning for connection and, utilizing screens and phones, and being really isolated during the pandemic, that all we wanted to do was be back with one another. And I guess, maybe be careful of what you wish for, because we are so close to each other right now. And it has really forced us out of those grown habits of, we're going to Zoom call, we're going to email, we're going to distribute via social media. Yes, that's important. Those are important tools. But for us to be able to say, we're getting there, we're talking to people, strip your titles and, your agency titles and what you stand for, and just talk to people. It has been refreshing to connect in that way, and it's happening across the board. And we hope to encourage that way of communication moving forward once we do recover from this.
We'll be back with more of my conversation with Tanya Kristen and Sarah Galbraith after we hear another track from Bob and Sarah Amos's new record, Ever Onward. This one's called Blood Red Rose.
Red was the color of the rose that she wore as we faced our last embrace, standing by the door. But as I turned, I only yearned to keep my eyes ahead, and with the day I rode away as the night sky turned to red. Down the road a mile from home, a pain ran across my chest, and there inside my coat did find that blood red rose was pressed. I kept it there, so to bear the petals and the thorns, and there it stayed both night and day until this very morn. Glory, fame, and honor came upon the battlefield, fired by unyielding pride and fantasies of steel. But here alone I find they've flown, I'm left with only love and longing for the one who wore the rose as red as blood. And when you find these words of mine pinned here upon my chest, promise me one final deed, it is my last request. And to my bride take what I write, so she will understand, and give my love the remnants of this rose within my hand. Red was the color of the rose that she wore as we faced our last embrace, stand
Bob and Sarah Amos, Blood Red Rose, from their new record Ever Onward. And now let's hear some more from Tanya, Kristen, and Sarah Galbraith of Green Mountain United Way. I'm interested in any particular moments that either of you have experienced to share, just experiences that stand out for you from the last couple of weeks.
I have a few. A few come to mind. But to me, one of the kind of most breathtaking stories was hearing from the owner, Johanna Thibault. She owns Harry's Hardware in the Den. It's a hardware store in downtown Cabot. Her and her husband, the night of the storms and flooding, thought they were hearing thunder, and it turned out it was the sound of boulders getting moved in the Winooski River behind their store. And by 10:30 that night, they had been doing everything they could to keep the water out, throwing every sandbag and bag of mulch at the door that they could. They eventually had to be evacuated by a bucket loader across a road that was just rushing with water and eroding right in front of them. And she said, we just held our breath and went for it. By the next morning, they were back up and running. People came out of the hills into town and helped right away, getting to clean up, the fire department, the road crew. And so it was just maybe 6 hours later, they were running again. And she said, people just need some normalcy right now. They need a place to connect and feel supported. So, you hear stories like that, and it's a little bit terrifying and it's a little bit uplifting. And those really stick with me. Mm-hmm. And, one of my favorite conversations was with the food shelf coordinator in the small town of Woodbury, tiny little town. And I had been doing some outreach to all of our communities, just figuring out where are you in recovery? What do you need? How can we support? And she's a lovely woman, probably, I'd have to guess, maybe in her 70s, retired, and does this as a volunteer. And she said to me, we're just over here taking care of each other. And I thought that's just a really great testament to what we do. And, you don't want to think there's a silver lining to any of this. None of us want it to be happening at all. But if there's a little tiny glimmer, it's just that we have this tremendous capacity and energy to take care of each other and organize and move through.
I was a first responder in a disaster back in 2005 in a different location. And what was so amazing to me, it was my first experience of something like that, was watching how everyone came together. It was so heartwarming and beautiful. And people who might ordinarily not speak to each other, working together, helping each other, looking out for each other. So it's one of those things that we humans seem to do when things are at their worst. We rise.
Agreed. And, for all the beautiful moments too, there has been just this really clear delineation between the socioeconomical classes in our communities. And, after attending a few meetings and hearing community members come forward and attempt to talk to FEMA, and FEMA is doing a wonderful job, but, this is a very overwhelming issue for all involved. We have 75-year-old Vietnam veterans standing up at a microphone in front of, hundreds of people in an auditorium saying, I'm 75 years old. I'm a Vietnam vet. So is my wife. We're homeless now. What can you do for us? And I'm here representing my community on Vine Street in Barrie that has gone through this too many times, and we don't know how to rebuild, and we don't know how to move forward. For me, watching his representation of so many people that have little to no voice in many decisions that are made around them, that he was given that opportunity to share his experience and where he is, was great to see, but also heartbreaking that this is a person who's representing so many that just want to be able to live in a home, and they are now left without. And how do we as a state respond to that when we're looking at the magnitude, crisis of limited housing or no housing to transport people, and, the daily challenges that we continue to move through just with financial struggles. Now we're in a completely different situation. How do we continue recognizing those voices and come together for a more sustainable future for all people, particularly those that have been the hardest hit and have the most to lose?
So for folks who are listening in Vermont and elsewhere, what can they do to help? I mean, you don't want 20,000 people descending on Vermont to come and pitch in. That would be overwhelming and impossible to coordinate. How can people help?
That's a great question. And you're right. There is this tendency, right? We want to rush in and help. And one of the hard things about something like this is that sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit back and wait a little bit, kind of hold that momentum and wait, and to keep a long range view that it's starting to come out of the immediate critical phase 1 response and starting to need to think about longer term things around rebuilding and infrastructure. And this is going to be a long haul. So there will be other calls for help along the way as well. And so in terms of volunteering, there is a state database where people can register. There's lots of great nonprofits and organizations moving around this space that may potentially in the future have calls for volunteers. And we try to share that information out at Green Mountain United Way. There's also several relief funds in place. The Vermont Community Foundation has a fund. All of the United Ways in Vermont have relief funds. So if you have an area of the state that you're interested in directing your donation to, you can go to that United Way and donate there. And then I just generally have a couple of tips, and this would apply anywhere. I think what I've learned from this experience is to ask what's needed first. We're a community of helpers here in Vermont, right? And what I saw a lot of was people saying, I'm going to bake 200 cupcakes and bring them to this town tomorrow. And it's the best of intentions. It's so heartfelt, but it also might not be what that community needs. And they might not have the capacity to even receive or distribute something like that. Mm-hmm. So ask first, listen to the answer, be ready to take direction and hear what people need and what they don't need. Another example, a lot of offers of clothing donations, great intention, not what is needed at the moment. And so you just really need to ask and listen.
Wise words. I mean, Vermont is a special place, not just for Vermonters, but for the nation. Vermont holds a special place in the history of the country and as a place that stands for a certain kind of openness and welcoming and I want to say acceptance of diversity, even though there are challenges, and so it's a place worth directing some resources to help.
Agreed. Yeah.
Completely agreed.
Thank you both so much for talking with me. I know this was brief, but I'm thrilled to hear what's going on. I'm really glad you're both there on the ground with other folks helping out. Just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been great to be here with you.
Thank you. And thank everyone for their kind thoughts and also support in whatever way you can give. It's much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Tanya and Sarah, for talking with me. And it's great to hear about how people are supporting each other in Vermont. I know that it's going to be quite a project to recover from the flooding that occurred a few weeks ago. And folks, if you'd like to know more about what's happening in Vermont, ways to help, you can go to gmunitedway.org. That's Green Mountain United Way. And they have lots of information there about ways you can help. There is also a link on the Paradigms website, paradigms.life. to the Vermont Flood Recovery and Response Fund. You can donate there. I'm sure Vermonters appreciate the help. And thank you to Bob and Sarah Amos for being on the show and sharing their story a bit with us and their wonderful music. Definitely check out their album Ever Onward. It's really a wonderful listen. And their website is bobamos.com, BOBAMOS.com. And there you'll find a link to Bob and Sarah Amos and their musical work together as a duo, as well as their band. Mentioned more than once in the episode is the whole small town thing. Well, Vermont is all small towns, and it is not a perfect place, and there are social issues, but there is a general ethic of getting along. So when you think of a small town, think of how people are helping each other in small towns. Not only in Vermont, but all across the country. When there are disasters, and even when there aren't, most people in small towns are actually decent people who want to help each other out. Let's build on that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Paradigms, and that you'll check out the Paradigms website, paradigms.life, with all of our 14 years worth of episodes. You can find Paradigms wherever you find your podcasts. So enjoy. We're going to go out with one more song from Bob and Sarah Amos's new record, Ever Onward. We're going to hear the title track. Oh, and the word for the week is neighbor. Be a neighbor. Notice your neighbors. It's good to know who your neighbors are. You never know when you all might need each other. So notice your neighbors this week. Enjoy the music. Baruch signing off for this episode of Paradigms. We'll be back next time with more inspiring people. Until then, be a neighbor and be well.
Floating world of dreams, truth revealed in shadowed scenes, ever onward. Cannot change where we have been, what we've seen or taken in, ever onward. And burn the page, ashes rise to quell the rage, ever onward. Walls around, falling down. Look to where your angels fly, just beyond where phantoms lie, ever onward. What is now is also true. Trash the old and build the new, ever onward. Cry and shout, drive it out. Ooh, ever onward. Ever onward. Oh, ever onward.
You've been listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.